Hello, I'm Philippa Huckel and this is Without Fear or Greed. This week we're going to learn how our brains process traumatic events and crises in order to let us learn from the past. Because we're human, we have emotions, but extreme emotions can be debilitating. We don't function well and we don't make healthy, calm decisions when we're angry, distraught, grieving, or in shock. So our brains have an inbuilt mechanism to help us recover from emotionally distressing events. Basically, we have a mechanism to get over things so we can look back on and learn from the past without feeling overwhelmed. Our brains do this through a mechanism known as the peak end rule. Whenever a big event happens in our lives, our brains deal with it by taking the peak of that experience or the most intense feeling it had to do with that event and taking the end or how you feel now, and it merges these two into a mental snapshot which we store as a memory of the event. Let's see how this works with a big emotional event like the breakup of a relationship. Of course, when it happens you feel absolutely terrible. Your brain takes the peak or the most distraught you feel about it and the end, how you're feeling now, and merges these two into a mental snapshot. Every time you look at that snapshot, the breakup is fresh and vivid in your mind. When you think about it, the intensity of all your feelings comes flooding back. But as time goes on and you get distanced from the peak, it loses some of its vividness. You become instead far more aware of the end, which is how you feel now, much more than how you felt back then. So the memory begins to fade. Eventually you get to the point where you remember that you were distraught, but you just don't feel like that anymore. That's how time heals. So the peak end rule is a mechanism that allows us to look back on the past without emotion. And of course that's always a better position to make a decision from. In fact, this is how we process every traumatic event. Back when SARS hit Hong Kong, masks were everywhere, public places were deserted, schools were emptied. Everybody felt very, very afraid. In fact, the property market crashed 70% in no time at all. Now, as the world moved on and put the distance of time between ourselves and SARS, the vividness of those intense emotions faded. Today, you can look back on SARS, but no longer feel the emotion that accompanied it. That's why so many people in Hong Kong say, of course, they hope SARS never happens again, but if it does, they're definitely buying property. The point is that with emotion removed, the outcome of the past in hindsight looks so obvious. Take away the cold fear that surrounds any crisis, and later the recovery can seem so obvious. The danger is that the peak end rule creates hindsight bias, or the "I knew how it would turn out" effect. Hindsight bias is dangerous because it can stop you learning one of the most important investment lessons. And to understand this, remember that there are two ways our brains operate: analytically and instinctively or emotionally. And to be a good investor, you don't just have to recognize that a market is low, as during SARS, but to realize that these low points will always be accompanied by powerful primal emotions, which you first have to acknowledge and then realize that you must overcome them in order to grasp the opportunity. So don't let hindsight bias trick you into thinking that the past was easy or obvious. It wasn't. Fear and greed are powerful instincts, and to override them you need to first of all recognize what is happening so you can shift your decision-making process from the instinctive back to the analytical where it belongs. See you next time. I'm Philippa Huckel and this is Without Fear or Greed.